Hey Dean, nice to see you again. Thank you for coming. We have with us today Dean Piedmont, the owner of the Countering Violent Extremism Initiative. And I'm very proud to say an old friend of mine. We met more than 7 years ago in Colombia.
I remember, yes we did.
Yeah, in the field, doing paramilitary reintegration. The FARC were still very active. We had Black Hawk helicopters and snipers guarding us, and it was quite an exciting time. So now in 2017, the FARC is reaching a peace deal. So since you're the reintegration expert, one of the world's great reintegration experts, let's talk about what that means for Colombia's business environment that they're reaching a peace deal, and your assessment.
Absolutely. Well, Vanessa, it's good to see you again, as always. And yeah, I remember that, 2010 in Colombia. And I remember being there working on the FARC, the paramilitary issue, and a great trip, but thinking the entire time, this is not going to happen.
Okay.
It's a rich environment, it's a wealthy company, it has all the capacities it needs to truly develop, but it is not a permissive environment.
Okay.
We've seen this happen several times. What we've seen more recently, and we knew it back then. Back then I was doing a lot of work with the UN, in that capacity, that without the FARC having a stakeholdership in the country, without it being able to transform its identity from a terrorist organization to one of being a political entity, an entity with its own business interests that were being met, that it would stymie development opportunities in Colombia. With the recent signing of the peace agreement, the opportunity to increase the security space, to have a more inclusive governance space, provides enormous business economic opportunities, not only for Colombia and operating in Colombia, but foreign direct investment and other investments outside of Colombia to come in.
So a lot of governments and UN agencies and government agencies have hired you as one of the top 5 experts in the world, really, to, or possibly the top one, to develop programs to reintegrate people to de-radicalize them as they leave violent extremist groups. You are moving increasingly into working with the private sector. How does your expertise translate into a private sector program for corporate social responsibility that mitigates the risk of their operating environment, particularly things like extractive industries that are always in these insecure environments?
The UN has known for a long time that true economic development will not occur without the private sector. Now, these extractive industries are nothing new. War makes countries poor, but usually doesn't occur in poor countries. This also is nothing new. What the UN, as being a public center entity, was able to do, and do successfully, is enter into a highly destabilized space, political or humanitarian. If we look not even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, the relationship in the state with the UN, with the private sector, was very binary. You had identifiable geopolitical space where war occurred. It occurred internationally or it occurred within a state. That is no longer the case. The advent of violent extremism, the new strain of terrorism and counterterrorism that we're seeing, is destabilizing spaces where the private sector has traditionally worked. Wealthy countries we see in parts all through Africa, North Africa, right through the Middle East, as well as creating opportunities for the private sector to engage and stabilize spaces at the social impact level, at the community level. The difficulty is the private sector is not well versed in getting into those spaces, the community space, the security sector space, and the UN is not well versed in engaging the private sector in terms of how to leverage investment opportunities to increasingly secure the security and the social space. This is where the private sector has a fantastic opportunity to engage its social responsibility, its social impact, and its political risk modeling to expand its wealth and economic opportunities.
So what is your recommendation for this sort of political risk modeling that these big corporations do, what is it that you bring to the table that's extra, that they're not used to doing, that is something that most of their financial consultants or legal consultants don't necessarily consider?
Well, it's filling this new space.
Okay.
So if we look at some of, let's say, the bigger organizations, the Big Four, some of the top branded organizations, what they do is they look at financial oversight, they look at regulatory oversight, they look at a lot of the cyberspace issues, and a lot of their risk modeling has to do with financial modeling.
Okay.
What they don't do is look at the operational space, the programmatic space. They don't look at the political or the geopolitical space, and they don't look at the security space.
Okay.
These are areas where they can very reasonably and probably at a necessity build out their business models.
Right.
So they can enter these spaces where there's enormous opportunity, yet enormous fragility.
Okay. Such as?
I would say if you look at Nigeria, maybe the most prominent example.
Okay.
Nigeria is a country that the stability of Nigeria is basically, I would say the stability of West Africa itself is contingent on the stability of Nigeria.
Right. A
major trading partner, a major extractive industry, prone to violent extremism.
Right.
And undergoing, I would say, various reintegration processes where it's trying to bring in these groups in order to secure the space. Enormous governance issues, enormous need to work with various security sector actors that the private sector doesn't engage, and to do so continually.
Right. To
engage in assessments and to see how that environment is.
So the assessment should be ongoing, sort of every 6 months, 8 months, 12 months?
What the private sector does is because it's working in a binary system.
Right.
It says, we have assessed an environment.
Right.
We assess this environment to be stable.
Right.
Or now we know our risk appetite.
Right.
We will engage.
Right.
And under certain conditions we may disengage.
Right.
And we'll mitigate our risks.
Right.
What is lacking is transferring the capacity to continually, so they treat it very episodic. Right. It becomes an event.
Right.
As opposed to a process. Right. Doing it in a process-oriented way takes a more systems approach where the private sector says every 6 months or every year we will engage in this assessment. Why? Because if we are actually engaging in economic development, then the security space should become more stable. We need to know that. It will help us to determine where to further engage, where not to engage. Where are we having the highest social, political, economic impact? Where it's stabilizing for reasons outside of its control, it can pull back, engage at a different level politically, with security sector actors it's not well versed to work with, military, intelligence sectors, I would say governance sectors, and then recalibrate, re-engage. It also is missing the opportunity, and this is the social impact, the social responsibility modeling, to go in and engage with the community. Because in part, if an oil well is damaged or blown up or sabotaged, it's going to be done at the community level, not by a drone. It'll be done at the community level by people who are living in the community yet are being commanded by people with enormous power. People we see in places like with the FARC. People we see with ties to these extremism groups that are not monolithic.
Or Al-Shabaab, which we also know.
Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram. The mistake that the international community tends to make is viewing these groups as monolithic, therefore they must be defeated, as opposed to understanding some of them operate very ideologically, others based on political practicality.
And financial practicality. I mean, they also,
they're making money.
Making money, exactly.
And they can be brought into the fold under certain conditions. We are able to analyze and provide that level of conditionality for engagement.
Analyzing the fractures and a little more granularity about how to manage the crisis when it does happen as well, right?
Well, a lot of it is not only managing the crisis when it happens, it's forecasting and knowing where it will happen or where you have to look for trigger points.
Right.
I would say in any given environment, if you have an upcoming elections,
right.
you may see a highly stabilizing or destabilizing environment,
okay.
but you need to get on the ground to see that.
So my final question is then, of course, inevitably, what do you see as the biggest trend for 2017, 2018? We have a new U.S. president in the White House. Now what? From a corporate risk modeling perspective.
When I look at 2017, I would not look at just 2017. It's a very short-sighted way to look.
Mm-hmm.
I would look at 2017, 18, and then I'd project out to 22. I'd do a 5-year projection.
Mm-hmm.
What, for corporate business interest in political risk modeling, what they would do very well to look at is what direction is the administration taking its policies?
Right.
Where is it looking at its investment?
Right.
And where is it going to move this counterterrorism space?
Right.
And a lot of it's based around the narrative that's being used will determine the policies,
okay.
how those policies are perceived.
Okay.
Being able to adapt to the direction that the new administration is taking the United States
right.
will enable the private sector to enter new spaces,
mm-hmm.
To influence those spaces economically,
okay.
to capture more financial assets and resources,
right.
but also enable it to determine its risk appetite
right.
in terms of where it wants to engage,
right.
how, and
right.
where it wants to disengage.
Okay.
Another, and I think this is critical,
mm-hmm.
Another important space, and we see this in the civil society space,
right.
not the favorite space of the private sector.
No.
It's going to boutique shops. Boutique shops, these fractures.
Right.
The uniqueness about these fractures are boutique shops capitalize on these fractures because the larger geopolitical space is occupied
right.
by bigger companies.
Right.
So this requires these smaller boutique shops to get in there, develop relationships with very hard-to-reach actors, mm-hmm. often actors wearing multiple hats, double or triple-hatted,
right.
chapeaued,
mm-hmm.
intelligence, security sectors, community leaders, provincial governance leaders,
mm-hmm.
and to be able to engage with these people on the ground and translate that level of engagement to a much higher corporate level. And in advisory services, these boutique shops will be the expertise that helps the bigger shops build out their business model around political risk in the next 1, 2, and 5 years.
Well, excellent. As the owner of one boutique shop to the owner of another boutique shop, I'm delighted to hear this. Thank you so much, Steve. Good to see you again. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.